Reborn, Execution Day. I knocked out the maid, took her clothes, grabbed the money, and ran. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. The acrid, sweet taste of the poisoned wine still seemed to linger in his throat, and his internal organs were writhing in excruciating pain. I suddenly opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and cold sweat instantly soaked through my undershirt. The first thing that caught my eye was the rear building in the eastern side courtyard, piled high with discarded desks and chairs. The air was thick with the smell of mold. The doors and windows were all securely chained shut from the outside with chains as thick as a wrist, and a few faint rays of daylight seeped through the cracks. Outside the courtyard, the metallic clang of armor clashing and the heavy thud of the Imperial Guard's boots on the blue stone pavers could be heard from time to time. I bit down hard on my lower lip until I tasted the rusty, metallic taste of blood. Only then did I realize I had truly come back to life. It was early autumn of the 14th year of the Jing-Tai era. My father had been imprisoned on charges of colluding with the enemy and plotting rebellion, and the entire Nie family, more than 100 people, had been confined to our estate by the Imperial Guard, awaiting the day of our judgment. In a past life, just half an hour later, an imperial edict was issued ordering the execution of the entire Nie family without a joint trial by the three departments. Their blood stained the entire courtyard red. There was a clatter as the chain on the door lock was unfastened. I instantly suppressed all my emotions, my gaze sweeping across the cramped room like a cold arrow, finally settling on a blue brick at my feet that was being used to cushion the corner of the table. Creak, the heavy wooden door swung open. Suichio walked in carrying a large, chipped earthenware bowl. The bowl was half filled with leftover food that looked like stale soup. She was wearing a short, grayish-brown coarse-cloth tunic, but her belt was tied so tightly that a bulge had formed unnaturally at the front of her tunic. Now that everyone in the Nie household is a prisoner, how could the Imperial Guard stationed outside possibly be kind enough to serve us a meal? This food is nothing more than Wei Mingting's way of ensuring we don't starve to death or take our own lives before the Imperial Edict is issued, so that he can witness with his own eyes the spectacle of our entire family's downfall. And Suichio, once a lowly maid at the Nie household who wasn't even allowed into the main wife's quarters, was now able to come and go as she pleased in the heavily guarded detention room. I know what she's hiding. In her past life, it was she who, taking advantage of the chaos, pried open the secret compartment my mother had hidden under the sink in the washroom and stole every last one of the Nie family's anonymous silver notes, the ones intended to bribe the guards at the Celestial Prison, and even informed Wei Mingting of my mother's secret stash of my father's final letter, in exchange for her own survival. Young lady, it's time to eat. Suichio slammed the coarse porcelain bowl down hard on the dusty square table, sending a few drops of murky soup splashing out. She looked down at me from above, her eyes devoid of even a trace of their former reverence. Instead, they betrayed an unmistakable sense of glee and impatience. This was a gift from an Imperial Guard officer. If you don't eat it, you'll end up as a starving ghost on the path to the underworld. As she spoke, her hand instinctively brushed against the bulge in her bosom, and she turned her toes toward the door, ready to wrap things up and leave. I looked at the bowl of stale rice, lowered my eyes, and let my shoulders tremble slightly. Pretending to be both terrified and at a loss, I staggered to my feet, holding onto the wall for support. Suichio. What's really going on out there? Is there any news about my father in the Celestial Prison? Those soldiers. My voice was hoarse, tinged with a desperate sob. A flash of contempt crossed Suichio's eyes, and she impatiently interrupted me. How would this servant know? Magistrate Wei is kind-hearted. Out of consideration for the fact that this servant had no part in the master's family's rebellion, he specially granted me a pass allowing me to leave the estate to earn a living. Young miss, you'd better just accept your fate. Just as she turned completely around, thinking I'd been completely scared out of my wits and was completely off guard, I suddenly stopped in my tracks. The mask of sorrow and weakness slipped away in an instant. I bent down, grabbed the heavy blue brick, clenched it tightly in both hands, and without a moment's hesitation, with all my might, smashed it hard against the back of her head. There was a dull thud. Suichio didn't even have time to let out a cry of surprise. Her eyes rolled back, and she fell stiff as a severed piece of dead wood onto the dusty blue brick floor. I immediately crouched down and deftly pulled open her collar. Sure enough, a thick stack of silver bills from the Datong money house, along with a wooden pass engraved with the character Wei, was tucked against her undershirt. I quickly stuffed these items into my sleeve pocket. This is what I'm counting on to turn my life around. Immediately afterward, I stripped off the coarse, short brown robe she was wearing. I took off my own eye-catching soft silk outer robe, adorned with a Claudian pattern, and draped it over her. Then I removed the beaded and jade hairpin from my own head and stuck it haphazardly into her bun. Then I dragged her behind the pile of odds and ends in the darkest corner of the room and had her lie on her side, facing inward. As long as no one came up close with a torch to take a closer look, she would appear to be the young miss of the Nie family, cowering in the corner out of fear. After doing all this, I stood up, scooped up the ashes from the incense burner on the table, and smeared them mercilessly across my face and neck. My once fair complexion instantly turned gray and grimy. I let my hair fall loose and casually gathered it into a low bun, the kind most commonly worn by lowly maidservants, then hunched my back slightly. As I pushed open the door, a cold breeze mixed with the chill of the autumn rain swept over me. The sky was so overcast it seemed as if it might collapse at any moment, and a deathly silence hung over the Nie manor. Outside the courtyard gate, 2 imperial guards with swords strapped across their waists stood idly, sheltering from the rain. With my head bowed, I held the empty earthenware bowl in both hands and, mimicking Suichio's usual coarse and hurried gait, made my way toward the courtyard gate. "Stop right there!" The imperial guard with a scar on his left cheek gripped the hilt of his sword and barked, "Who are you?" I stopped in my tracks, remaining hunched over, and lowered my head even further. I tightened my throat, imitating Suichio's slightly hoarse, down-to-earth accent, and tremblingly fished the wooden tag out of my sleeve and handed it to her. "My lords, I was acting on Magistrate Wei's orders to go in and deliver the prisoner's last meal. Now that the task is complete, Magistrate Wei has graciously granted me this pass, allowing me to leave the compound at once so as not to interfere with the duties that will follow." Scarface took the wooden tag and, by the dim light of day, made out the character Wei on it, then looked me up and down. I deliberately shrugged my shoulders and clutched the empty bowl to my chest, feigning extreme fear of them. He recognized the token. It was a special pass issued exclusively to Wei Mingting's personal guards. Seeing me dressed in drab, coarse cloth, my face caked with mud, and looking shabby, he didn't suspect a thing. He tossed the wooden token back to me with disgust, muttering, "You're lucky to be alive, you lowly wench. Get out of here fast, stop being such an eyesore." Oh, thank you, sir, thank you, sir." I bowed repeatedly and accepted the wooden token with both hands. Following the shadows along the colonnade, I relied on my memory to avoid the patrolling guards and headed straight for the side gate at the back of the Nie residence. With Wei Mingting's wooden pass in hand, the guard at the side gate merely gave me a cursory glance before impatiently shooing me away. Just as I stepped outside the high walls of the Nie residence and set foot on the long street paved with blue-green stone slabs, a sudden, rapid clatter of hooves rang out from the far end of the street. "The imperial edict has arrived, the entire Nie family is to be executed on the spot immediately." A sharp command tore through the evening stillness, accompanied by the clang of a long sword being drawn from its sheath. It was Wei Mingting, who had arrived bearing the final imperial edict ordering execution by beheading. I didn't look back even once at that vermilion lacquered gate, which was about to be stained red with blood. I pulled my conical hat down over my eyes and, braving the autumn rain that was gradually turning into a drizzle, hurried deep into the bustling, labyrinthine alleys. The autumn rain was falling harder and harder. The pea-sized raindrops pounded against my conical hat, making a dull thud that perfectly masked the sound of my hurried footsteps. At this moment, the long streets of the capital were like a ferocious beast about to awaken. News of the raid on the Nie residence would soon spread throughout the 5 cities' military command. Once Wei Mingting discovered that the body in the storage room was that of Suichio, the lowly maidservant, he would undoubtedly seal off the city gates and the water gates immediately. I had at most half an hour left. I didn't flee outside the city, that would have been like walking straight into a trap. Relying on the fragments of information I'd pieced together from overhearing the prison guards drinking and chatting in the death cell during my previous life, I headed straight for the Shirley Fort Canal Wharf in the southern part of the city. The jailer from a past life once remarked that on the very night the entire Nie family was executed, Prince Chu, who governed the northern frontier, returned to the capital by imperial decree. Rather than traveling by land with great fanfare, he concealed his identity and boarded a 5-masted merchant ship owned by the Shen family, the wealthiest family in Jiangnan, and quietly docked at Shirley Fort. Chu Linkei, the only prince of a different surname in the court who commands a large army, acts with ruthless ferocity and wields immense power throughout the court. He is also Wei Mingting's greatest political rival in the imperial court. I know full well that, at this moment, Wei Mingting's trap has engulfed the capital. Only Chu Linkei, the swiftest and most lethal blade, can cut through this hopeless predicament where death is the only outcome. The pier was deserted, with only a few wind-swept lanterns teetering precariously in the wind and rain. A few black-canopied boats were moored on the water, seeking shelter from the storm, and in the deepest berth stood a massive 5-masted merchant ship, with 2 horn-shaped lanterns bearing the character Shen hanging from its bow. I pulled my conical hat down low, forced myself to calm my pounding heart, and strode quickly toward the gangplank of the merchant ship. Just as I set foot on the slippery wooden plank, a cold broadsword was silently pressed against my neck from the darkness. The blade was so sharp that it instantly sliced through the rough collar of my shirt and pressed against my warm skin. "Get out of here." The voice behind him was as deep and cold as ice. No footsteps, no unnecessary chatter, that's the way of the northern frontier's elite. I didn't struggle. I even deliberately slowed my breathing. I raised my hands slowly, keeping them where they could see them, and said in a very low yet unusually clear voice, "Go tell your master that someone has come to do business with the ledger detailing Wei Mingting's secret stockpile of weapons." The knife pressed against her neck paused for a moment. The secret guard clearly hadn't expected a mud-covered servant girl to be able to reveal the secrets of the ruling minister in a single breath. "I'll count to 3. If I don't see the person in charge or the location of the ledgers, they'll sink into this moat along with my life." My tone was strangely calm, as if I were discussing someone else's life or death. 1, 2. Bring her in. A voice, extremely languid, yet exuding a suffocating sense of oppression, came from deep within the cabin. With a swish of his sword, I was escorted by 2 guards, one on my left and one on my right, into the most secluded cabin on the lower deck. There were no oil lamps in the cabin. Only a night pearl glowed in the corner, casting a dim, green light. The air was filled with the scent of the finest agarwood, yet it could not mask the faint smell of blood. A man was reclining on a large rosewood chair. He wore a plain, black brocade robe and idly twirled a sheep's fat jade ring between his fingers. Even though most of his body was hidden in the shadows, the menacing aura forged in a sea of corpses and blood still sent a chill down one's spine. "This is Chu Linkei." I didn't kneel. Instead, I stood there with my back straight, meeting his probing, murderous gaze. "Look up." Chu Link's voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unquestionable command. I slowly took off the tattered straw hat, from which rainwater was dripping, revealing my face, which was smeared with incense ash and caked with mud. He snorted derisively, his tone brimming with undisguised contempt. "The ledgers detailing Wei Mingting's secret stockpile of weapons? From a runaway slave like you? It seems you've had enough of living and are trying your luck on this ship. Your Highness has an eye for detail." I ignored his sarcasm and looked him straight in the eye. "I am no runaway slave. I am Nie Zhiwei, daughter of Nie Pei, the former Minister of Revenue." His hand paused slightly as he fiddled with his finger ring. Chu Linkei finally sat up straight, his narrow, deep-set eyes narrowing slightly, like an eagle fixated on its prey. "The Nie family? Half an hour ago, the entire Nie family was executed by the Imperial Guards for colluding with the enemy and plotting treason." My heart gave a sudden jolt, and the image of my loved one's severed heads rolling across the ground from my past life once again pierced my nerves. I clenched my palm tightly, using the pain to keep my wits about me. Yes, the Nie family was wiped out. It was because my father uncovered irrefutable evidence that Wei Mingting had embezzled the annual tribute in Jiangnan and used that silver to secretly stockpile armor and weapons outside the city. Fearing that my father would report this directly to the emperor, Wei Mingting forged a letter accusing him of treason and struck first to silence him. I took a deep breath, my tone growing even colder. Wei Mingting searched the Nie residence from top to bottom but couldn't find the real ledger or registry. That's because my father hid them in a place known only to me. If Wei Mingting were to get his hands on them and destroy them completely, the prince would find it nearly impossible to hold a leverage over him in the imperial court in the future. A deathly silence fell over the cabin. The only sound was the pat-pat of rain hitting the boat's canopy outside. Chu Lin-Kei didn't reply right away. After a moment, he suddenly smiled. "Miss Nie, you're quite the schemer. Are you trying to use that ledger to trade for this prince's protection so you can escape with your life?" "That's not all," I said, tilting my head back and staring at him without flinching. "I want to be a blade in your highness's hand. A ledger might at most cause Wei Mingting some serious pain, but it won't take his life, because the current emperor can't do without the Wei family. But what if, behind the scenes, I gather more deeply entrenched vulnerabilities of the Wei faction for your highness and, step by step, dismantle his supporters?" "Oh." Chu Lin-Kei raised an eyebrow, seemingly finally taking a slight interest in me. "What makes you think this prince needs an orphaned girl who's lost her entire family to serve as my blade? I have plenty of loyal soldiers willing to die for me. A suicide assassin can only kill. He cannot destroy the will. Every word I speak is a hard-won lesson, bought with blood and tears from my past life. I know Wei Mingting's hypocrisy all too well. I'm aware of the sordid affairs behind his scenes, and I understand the weaknesses of his disciples. Most importantly," I paused for a moment, my eyes blazing with intense murderous intent and single-minded determination, "I bear an irreconcilable, blood feud with him, one that wiped out my entire clan. No one desires more than I do to see him torn to pieces and the Wei clan uprooted. Your Highness seeks power and a clean government. I seek the decapitation of every member of the Wei clan. Our goals may take different paths, but they ultimately lead to the same end." There was a long silence. "You're very bold, and very crazy." Chu Lin-Kei took a half-step back and sat down again in the rosewood chair, his tone returning to its usual languid tone. "Where are the ledgers?" "I know, I survived. Not only did I survive, but I also managed to board the most indestructible ship in the world. South of the city, Datong Money House, secret safe marked with the character Bing." Without hesitation, I played my trump card, leaving no room for bargaining or testing the waters. "I have the token." I handed him the brass token stained with Chui Chio's blood. In my previous life, just before my father was arrested, he had used this unassuming token to hide the incriminating evidence. Unfortunately, I was so foolish back then, I thought that pleading with Wei Mingting would save my father. Chu Lin-Kei glanced at the guard standing beside him. The guard immediately stepped forward to take the token, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. "Go and verify it," Chu Lin-Kei ordered calmly, then turned his gaze back to me. "If the ledgers are genuine, I'll spare your life. But if you dare to trick me, if there is even a single false word, Nie Zhiwei is willing to undergo the punishment of slow slicing. There's no need for your highness to lift a finger, I will take my own life right here." I interrupted him. Chu Lin-Kei chuckled softly. "Someone, please take Miss Nie to the aft cabin to freshen up. And while you're at it, give her a decent set of mistress's clothes to change into." "Yes." I turned around and followed the maid toward the cabin door. Just as I was about to step out of the secluded cabin, I looked back at Chu Lin-Kei, who was hidden in the shadows. "Thank you, Your Highness." The warm stream of water wound its way down his spine, washing away the incense-ashen mud that covered his body, yet it could not wash away that stench of decay that seemed to linger deep within his soul. The maid who attended to my bath was named Qingluan. She kept her eyes cast down throughout the entire process, moving swiftly and silently. She brought me a bright red embroidered satin gown with a flowing cloud pattern. The fabric was extremely thin and soft, certainly not the sort of garment worn by an ordinary, respectable young woman. Without the slightest hesitation, I let her slip on that eye-catching red dress, apply a thick layer of powder to her face, draw extremely dramatic, upward-sweeping eyebrows, and dab the brightest red lipstick on her lips. The figure reflected in the bronze mirror bore no resemblance whatsoever to the gentle and dignified eldest daughter of the Nie family. Rather, she looked like a stunningly beautiful favorite concubine who had grown spoiled by her position and the favor of the powerful. When I stepped back into the main cabin, the scent of agarwood in the air seemed to have faded slightly. Chu Lin-Kei remained in the same relaxed posture as before, though a yellowed ledger had now appeared on the long rosewood table in front of him. His slender fingers idly turned a page. When he heard footsteps, he didn't even look up. The ink has penetrated to the bone. The seal is genuine. Secretary Nie's work is indeed flawless. His voice was calm, betraying no emotion. I will accept this ransom. I'm glad the prince is satisfied. I stepped forward, disregarding the formalities expected of a lady of the inner quarters, and sat down directly in an armchair beside him. This is merely the first token of my loyalty. Wei Mingting has formed a complex web of factional alliances within the court. To uproot him completely, a single ledger of weapons alone is far from enough. Chu Lin-Kei finally looked up, his gaze unabashedly sweeping over my exquisitely dazzling outfit, and a faint glimmer of admiration flashed in his eyes. Miss Nie, you've certainly adapted very quickly. I just wonder if your courage will last through tonight. No sooner had the words left his mouth than an extremely piercing neigh suddenly rang out from outside the cabin, accompanied by the chaotic, heavy clatter of armored boots, instantly shattering the dead silence on the river. The 5 cities' military command has been ordered to apprehend the fugitive. Seal off the docks. All vessels must anchor immediately for inspection. The light from the torch shone through the cracks in the ship's portholes, casting a flickering glow in the otherwise dim cabin. My grip on the teacup tightened slightly, and the tips of my fingers turned white. Wei Mingting acted even faster than I had imagined. Judging by the timing, the Imperial Guard must have already realized that the corpse in the storage room, dressed in my clothes, was not me, and immediately mobilized the 5 cities' military command to seal off the city gates, both on land and on water. It seems Wei Mingting is extremely obsessed with you, the one who slipped through his net, Chu Lin-Kei said as he picked up his teacup and gently skimmed off the foam, looking on as if he were enjoying the show. That military commander, Zhao Peng, is the most vicious mad dog under Wei Mingting's command. Do you think he'd dare to search this prince's ship? He'd dare. Having endured unspeakable torment in prison during my previous life, I knew all too well the modus operandi of Wei Mingting's henchmen. Zhao Peng is desperate to prove himself to Wei Mingting. If there's even the slightest hint of suspicion, he'll pounce, even if it means risking the prince's displeasure. But I set down my teacup, snatched up a gold leaf folding fan from the table, and held it up to partially cover my face. My gaze instantly became both alluring and piercing. He's afraid of death. And he's even more afraid of dying without knowing why. Outside the hatch, the guard's shouts mingled with Zhao Peng's gruff voice. You blind dog! This is a Shen family merchant ship, and my master is on board. How dare you search it? So what if it's the Shen family? I'm acting on Lord Wei's strict orders. Even if the King of Heaven himself were on board tonight, we'd still have to verify his identity. Move aside! Accompanied by the clang of a sword being drawn, the beaded curtain at the cabin door was roughly pulled aside. A burly, heavily armored general strode in, holding a burning torch aloft. The moment he caught sight of Chu Lin-Kei seated in the seat of honor, his arrogant demeanor was instantly cut short. His knees buckled, and he fell to his knees with a thud. Your humble servant, Zhao Peng, captain of the 5 cities' military command, had no idea His Highness the Prince of Chu was here. I have disturbed your highness and deserve to die 1,000 times. Chu Lin-Kei didn't even lift an eyelid. He merely fiddled with the jade ring on his thumb, his voice as cold as ice. Since you know this is a capital offense, will you do it yourself, or shall I do it for you? Cold sweat poured down Zhao Peng's face like a waterfall, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to look up. Your Highness, please forgive me. It was not my intention to be disrespectful. The fact is that remnants of the Nie clan, who are wanted by the imperial court, have fled, and Magistrate Wei has ordered a thorough search and strict security. If there are any unidentified individuals on this ship. He plucked up the courage to glance at me, sitting nearby with most of my face hidden behind a folding fan. The air froze in an instant. I know that if Chu Lin-Kei were to speak up on my behalf right now, it would only arouse Wei Mingting's suspicion. To completely dispel this mad dog's doubts, I must break down his psychological defenses at their very root. I didn't avert my gaze from him. Instead, I snapped my folding fan shut with a snap and casually flung it down hard onto the long table. "How dare you!" I mimicked the tone of those spoiled noblewomen I'd seen in my past life, my voice sweet yet tinged with undisguised contempt and malice. "Who do you think you are, daring to look at me with such a filthy gaze? Is the prince's ship a place where a stinking dog like you can come and run amok?" Zhao Peng was taken aback by my outburst and was about to snap back at me, but I suddenly leaned forward, my gaze as piercing as a venomous snake, fixated on an old scar visible on his left wrist. "Captain Zhao, that old knife wound on your left wrist, it must ache excruciatingly whenever the weather turns gloomy and rainy, doesn't it?" I lowered my voice to a level only the three of us could hear, each word cutting to the bone. 2 years ago in Qingzhou, you personally hacked your sworn brother to death so you could embezzle a shipment of relief grain. Just because Wei Mingting doesn't know about this doesn't mean the prince doesn't. If you dare set foot in this inner cabin today, I guarantee that by tomorrow morning, your head, along with those of your entire family, will be displayed on the city gate tower. Zhao Peng's face instantly turned as white as paper, and his pupils contracted violently. He had kept that matter extremely secret, even Wei Mingting had been kept in the dark, so how could this red-clad woman before him, who seemed almost like a demon, know the details so clearly? He looked at Chu Lin-Kei with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Chu Lin-Kei, however, merely gave me a half-smile and said nothing in response. In Zhao Peng's eyes, this was tantamount to admitting that this woman was a key figure in Chu Ling's network of secret agents. "Get lost," Chu Lin-Kei said, uttering a single word at just the right moment, his words brimming with murderous intent. "Yes. I deserve to die. I'll get out of here right now." Zhao Peng no longer cared about his status as a criminal wanted by the imperial court. He scrambled out of the cabin, even tripping over the beaded curtain in his panic. Soon, voices from outside could be heard as Zhao Peng ordered a retreat and instructed them to search elsewhere. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, the sound of wind and rain returned to the river. Only then did the tension in my back ease slightly. My palms were already soaked with cold sweat. The old case in Qingzhou 2 years ago, Chu Lin-Kei leaned forward slightly, closing in on me with an overwhelming sense of pressure. Even this prince's undercover agents haven't been able to verify the details. How could you, a woman confined to the inner chambers, possibly know about it? Meeting his probing gaze, I replied calmly, as I said, "I know the Wei faction inside and out. If your highness wishes to know more, please order the ship to set sail as soon as possible. This stalemate in the capital, we should move to a different location to continue the game." Chu Lin-Kei stared at me intently for a moment, then suddenly clapped his hands and chuckled softly. "Well done, Nie Zhiwei. Issue the order, hoist the sails and set out for the south overnight." Outside the cabin, the river water lapped against the ship's hull, producing a dull, rhythmic thud. The 5-masted merchant ship had completely broken through the blockade in the waters off the capital and was now riding the wind and cutting through the waves toward the south of the Yangtze River. It was only then that the vital energy that had been propping up my spine all along suddenly drained away. The tips of my fingers, clasping the blue and white teacup, began to tremble uncontrollably, sending ripples spreading out across the surface of the tea. I closed my eyes, but the sound of the imperial edict sentencing the Nie family to death echoed relentlessly in my mind. In my past life, I watched with my own eyes as my father's head was forced onto a rough wooden stake. His blood splattered onto my prison garb, burning hot enough to scald the skin. In this life, though I managed to escape with my life, all 134 members of the Nie household still met their end at the executioner's blade on that cold, rainy autumn night. A sharp, metallic sweet taste rose in my throat. I clenched my teeth tightly and forced myself to swallow the blood that was welling up. "If you want to cry, go cry on the deck. I won't tolerate the tears of a stray dog in this king's cabin. I opened my eyes, forced back the stinging sensation in my eyes, and downed the cup of tea, which had long since gone cold. Your Highness is joking. If tears could kill, Wei Mingting would have been torn to pieces long ago. I set down my teacup, my voice once again flat and cold. Now that I've boarded your Highness's ship, my life is meant to exact a debt. I have no energy left to cry. His hand paused slightly as he peeled the pear. Chu Lin-Kei looked up, his piercing gaze slicing across my face like a knife. After a moment, he casually tossed the peeled autumn pear into the blue and white porcelain plate beside him, and the short blade thudded as it struck the table. Very well. Remember what you're saying right now. He leaned forward slightly, staring at me with an overwhelming sense of pressure. Just a moment ago, in front of Zhao Ping, you were acting quite boldly under this prince's banner. A single statement about heading south to Jiangnan overnight was enough to make this prince's ship change course. Nie Zhiwei, you'd better give this prince a reason why you absolutely must go to Jiangnan. That weapons ledger won't buy you this prince's indulgence for the entire journey. Although the prince commands a large army, he is repeatedly thwarted by Wei Mingting in the imperial court simply because the Wei faction controls the 6 ministries, especially the Ministry of Revenue. I laid out my arguments clearly and methodically. The reason Wei Mingting is able to maintain a force of loyal assassins, hoard weapons in secret, and bribe court officials on a massive scale is all thanks to the silver flowing in from Jiangnan. That ledger of weapons purchases can be used to convict him of the crime of high treason, but it won't uproot his power. As long as His Majesty still needs him to keep the prince in check, that ledger will, at most, cost him a few scapegoats. Chu Lin-Kei raised an eyebrow noncommittally. So? So, to fell a tree, you must first cut its roots. Lu Xiuan, the salt inspector of Jiangnan, is Wei Mingting's biggest source of income. I uttered that name, enunciating each syllable clearly. A dark gleam flashed in Chu Ling's eyes as she laughed coldly. Lu Xiuan? That old fox has been operating in Jiangnan for a decade, with disciples and former subordinates scattered throughout the 2 Jiang regions. 3 groups of censors from the Board of Censors have investigated him, and the case files they brought back were as clean as snow. How could you, a woman confined to the inner chambers, possibly bring him down? It's because the officials from the Board of Censors were investigating in the wrong direction. I clasped my hands together and revealed the earth-shattering secret I had pieced together by chance in the death cell during my previous life. Lu Xiuan appears to be incorruptible. His lifestyle is frugal in every respect. He doesn't even keep the accounts for the contraband salt in his own governor's residence. Does your Highness know that at Jinshan Temple, just outside Yangzhou, there is a solid gold Maitreya Buddha that was consecrated just half a month ago? Chu Ling's gaze suddenly sharpened. I continued, that Buddha statue was donated by Lu Xiuan's second wife under the pretext of praying for her mother-in-law's well-being. The statue is hollow, and hidden inside are not only the secret ledgers detailing Lu Xiuan's embezzlement of salt taxes over the past 3 years, but also the ledgers documenting his use of government ships to smuggle salt and even his clandestine trade in refined iron with the Japanese pirates. In my past life, it wasn't until 3 years later that a salt merchant reported the incident due to a dispute over the division of the spoils, sending shockwaves through the court and the country. To protect himself, Wei Mingting sent men that very night to poison Lu Xiuan's entire family, thereby shifting all blame away from himself. In this life, I intend to set off this bombshell before Wei Mingting even has a chance to react. The cabin was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Chu Lin-Kei stared intently at me, and a dangerous gleam of interest gradually began to stir in his eyes, which had previously been calm and unruffled. Nie Zhiwei, just how many of Wei Mingting's death warrants are still stuck in your head? He suddenly chuckled softly, his voice tinged with a chilling sense of pleasure. It's enough for your Highness to root out the Wei faction completely. I didn't back down an inch, staring straight into his eyes. Fine. Chu Lin-Kei suddenly stood up, walked over to me, and looked down at me from above. I'll take you up on this wager. Once we reach Yangzhou, I want to see that ledger at Jinshan Temple. If I don't get it, I'll personally tie you up and hand you over to Wei Mingting as a favor. It's a deal. I accepted the challenge without hesitation. Immediately, I changed the subject and made a request, but I need a cover that will allow me to move about Yangzhou City openly and without arousing Lu Xiuan's suspicion. Chu Ling's gaze lingered for a moment as he scanned my strikingly eye-catching red brocade skirt adorned with floral embroidery, and a playful smile played at the corners of his lips. What's so hard about that? He suddenly reached out, his rough fingertips, marked by thin calluses from years of gripping a sword, casually brushing aside a strand of hair that had fallen near my ear, sending an instinctive shiver through me. His Highness the Prince of Chu has spent too long in the bitter cold of the northern frontier. He came south to the Jiangnan region in search of women and pleasure, took a fancy to a stunning concubine from the red light district, spoiled and domineering, and keeps her by his side day and night for his amusement. Is that status enough for you to stir up trouble here in Yangzhou? I fought the urge to pull away from his touch, knowing this was his way of testing my limits. Instead of backing away, I lifted my head and flashed him a smile, striking just the right balance of coquettish charm born of being pampered. As long as your Highness does not find my pretentious behavior offensive, I shall certainly fulfill my role as the source of trouble. That's for the best. Chu Lin-Kei withdrew his hand and turned toward the bed in the inner cabin. From now on, you'll be called Hongrui. Go wash the makeup off your face, that cheap scent of powder is giving this prince a headache. Once you're clean, get over here and grind ink for me. Yes, your Highness. I bowed slightly. The moment I turned around, the smile vanished from my face, leaving only a bone-chilling cold in my eyes. Autumn in Jiangnan is a bit more muggy than in Beijing. Our ship had been in Yangzhou for no more than 3 days when word spread throughout the official circles of the two rivers. His Highness the Prince of Chu, that fearsome figure, had come to the south without his official consort, accompanied only by a spoiled and alluring female companion named Hongrui. Inside the great Buddha hall at Jingshan Temple, the air was thick with the scent of incense, yet it could not mask the underlying tension in the air. This golden Maitreya statue was donated by Mrs. Lu to pray for her mother-in-law's well-being. Isn't it a bit out of line for Miss Hong to be so rude? The wife of the Yangzhou prefect chimed in sarcastically from the sidelines, stirring up trouble. I leaned against the edge of the meditation cushion in front of the Buddha, idly playing with the string of South Sea pearls Chu Lin-Kei had given me. I didn't even glance at them. Instead, my gaze was fixed intently on the half-man tall, solid gold Maitreya Buddha in the hall. Lu Xiuan's second wife, Mrs. Wang, was now fingering her prayer beads, staring at me with a stony expression. She was a clever woman and didn't lack the composure often seen in the wives of prefects, but her slightly white knuckles betrayed her inner tension. Rules? As far as our prince is concerned, my rules are the rules. I let out a coquettish laugh, yanked the golden hairpin from my head, and deliberately scraped it hard across the belly of the solid gold Buddha statue, leaving a jarring scratch. The gold's quality is quite good, but the Buddha's belly is way too big. I wonder if it's filled with nothing but dirty tricks. Ms. Wang jumped to her feet and shouted harshly, "How dare you! This is a sacred Buddhist site. How dare you, a concubine, run amok here? Someone, get this madwoman out of here." Several burly security guards immediately surrounded him. I didn't back down. Because at that very moment, Qing Feng, a secret guard of the King of Chu hiding in the shadows, whispered to me in an extremely low voice, "Miss, the Buddha's belly is empty." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt as if I'd been plunged into an ice cave. Empty? No way! I secretly read the case files from when that salt merchant was on trial in the Ministry of Justice's main hall in my past life, and they clearly state, Lu Xiuan's ledgers are hidden inside a Buddha statue at Jingshan Temple. Could it be that my rebirth has introduced an unexpected variable? Did Wei Mingting send a message in advance, prompting Lu Xiuan to evacuate? No, that's not right. If the ledger had already been moved, Ms. Wang wouldn't be so nervous right now. The look in her eyes just now as she watched me reach toward the Buddha's belly clearly revealed a strange sense of ease. On the contrary, when I inadvertently stepped back toward that rosewood altar table a moment ago, her breathing visibly faltered for an instant. I forced myself to calm down, as the prison guard's idle chatter from my past life in death row replayed rapidly in my mind. When that ledger was found, it was soaked in the scent of the oil from the eternal lamp. The ink was almost smudged. The scent of sesame oil. The offering table. It suddenly dawned on me. Only half of what that salt merchant had revealed in my past life had been passed down. The ledgers were indeed here with the Buddha statue, but they were definitely not inside that conspicuous Buddha statue. "Why are you in such a hurry, Lady Wang?" I suddenly burst out laughing, flicked my wrist, and knocked over the brass tray filled with tribute fruits in front of me. Amid the crowd's gasps, I lunged like a madman toward the rosewood altar table in front of the Maitreya Buddha. "You dare!" "Mrs. Wang" finally lost her composure and let out a shrill scream. It wasn't the temple guards who surrounded me, but 4 men in gray who had blended in with the pilgrims. In an instant, they drew the short knives hidden in their sleeves and lunged at me. Their movements were ruthless, aiming straight for my vital points. "These are the loyal henchmen the Liu family has raised." Ding! A sharp, metallic clang echoed through the hall. A folding fan, which had flown in from who knows where, sliced through the throat of the lead assassin as cleanly as if it were made of steel. Blood gushed out, splattering the gleaming golden statue of Maitreya Buddha. Wearing a plain black robe, Chu Lin-Kei had entered the grand hall at some point. He didn't even glance at the bodies on the floor. His gaze pierced through the terrified, screaming women and settled on me from afar. "You dare lay a hand on my men?" His voice wasn't loud, but it instantly sent the temperature in the entire hall plummeting to freezing point. The black armor guards under Chu Ling's command surged forward like ghosts and instantly became locked in a fierce battle with the Liu family's elite warriors. As for me, I turned a deaf ear to the slaughter unfolding behind me, my hands clutching tightly the bright yellow satin sutra cloth spread over the rosewood altar table. This sutra cloth was unusually thick and heavy. I clenched the golden hairpin in my hand, thrust it forcefully into the edge of the cloth, and slashed at it with all my might. There was a sharp, crackling sound as the silk tore. The bright yellow satin was torn open, and what fell out was not cotton batting, but page after page of private account ledgers, densely filled with entries and bearing the red seal of the Salt Transport Commissioner of the Two Rivers. The ledger wasn't hidden inside the Buddha's belly. Instead, it had been torn into individual pages and sewn into the sutra cloth in front of the Buddha. No wonder the people from the Board of Censors couldn't find it even after searching every corner of Yangzhou, that old fox Liu Xiwan. I grabbed the ledger page, which reeked of sesame oil, and turned to look at Chu Lin-Kei by the door. He walked toward me, stepping through a pool of blood. In his narrow, slanted eyes, there was no longer any trace of the previous condescension or hesitation. Instead, there was a heart-stopping, dark gleam, the kind one might see when looking at a fellow of one's own kind. "Your Highness," I held up the ledger and cast a cold glance at Lady Wang, who was slumped on the ground. My voice cut through the stench of blood with startling clarity. "I've uncovered Liu Xiwan's Achilles heel for you." A spark flared up from the sheep-horn lamp on the writing table, casting a flickering light on the pages of the ledger covered in dried bloodstains. I finished reconciling the final page of the private accounts and set down my lake brush, which had been thoroughly saturated with cinnabar. A deficit of exactly 3 million taels of silver and 40,000 chine of refined iron diverted to private smelters. Each and every one of these items was irrefutable evidence capable of causing a bloodbath among the officials of the 2 Jiang provinces. A long sword, radiating a chill, clattered down across the corner of the table. Chu Lin-Kei stepped into the cabin, still carrying the lingering scent of night air and the stench of blood. Liu Xiwan had hanged himself out of fear of punishment half an hour earlier, and along with the loyal assassins he had trained, they had been wiped out completely by the black armor guards. Such was Chu Ling's style, he never left any survivors to give his opponents a chance. I didn't look up. I simply pushed the organized ledgers toward him. "Does your Highness think these alone are enough to take Wei Mingting's life?" Chu Lin-Kei paused briefly as he removed his dark cloak, his narrow, phoenix-like eyes narrowing dangerously. "Forming factions for personal gain and hoarding weapons, according to the law, this calls for the execution of 9 generations of your family. Nie Zhiwei, do you perhaps think this prince's blade isn't sharp enough?" The prince's blade is certainly sharp, but the emperor's heart is even more unfathomable than that blade. I looked him straight in the eye and laid bare everything I had come to understand about the art of imperial politics during my previous life in the death cell. The reason Wei Mingting is able to wield absolute power in the court is, ultimately, because the emperor needs a vicious dog that can bite, one to counterbalance the 300,000 ironclad cavalry of the northern frontier under your command, your highness. Chu Ling's gaze suddenly turned cold, and the killing intent radiating from him instantly solidified into a tangible presence. I did not flinch, and with words as sharp as knives, I laid bare this gruesome truth. Once this ledger is sent to the capital, Wei Mingting will, at most, cut off a limb to save himself, sacrificing a few of his disciples to take the fall. To prevent your highness from gaining too much power, his majesty will not only refrain from executing Wei Mingting immediately, but will instead suppress this evidence of guilt, using it as a sword of Damocles to hang over the heads of the Wei faction in the future. And the lives of the 134 members of my Nie family will still be nothing more than a flimsy, muddled account. In my previous life, it was precisely because my father placed too much faith in the so-called divine justice and the sage's wise judgment that, on the very night he entered the palace bearing evidence of the Wei faction's corruption, he was falsely accused of treason, and his family was executed and his clan wiped out. Having been given a second chance at life, I will never again pin my hopes for revenge on the mercy of those in power. A suffocating silence fell over the cabin. Chu Lin-Kei stared down at me from above. Suddenly, he let out a cold laugh, leaned forward, braced his hands on the edge of the desk, and closed in on my face with an overwhelming sense of pressure. "So, what do you want to do?" "I want him to rebel," I said, enunciating each word clearly, my voice so steady that even I found it terrifying. "His Majesty may tolerate corruption among his ministers, but he will never tolerate anyone coveting imperial power. Only if Wei Mingting draws his sword will his Majesty not hesitate to deploy the Imperial Guard to chop him to pieces." "Let him rebel?" Chu Lin-Kei seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world, yet a fiery glint flickered in his eyes. "That old fox Wei Mingting has been biding his time for over a decade. How could he possibly draw his sword so easily?" "He will, as long as we corner him." I pulled a map of the waterways from Yangzhou to the capital from my sleeve and tapped my fingertip firmly on a spot marked Black Wind Gorge. "This is the only route back to the capital." I looked up, my eyes burning with intensity. Lu Xiwan is dead, and the ledgers have fallen into the prince's hands. By now, this news must have already been sent to the capital through the Wei faction's secret channels. Wei Mingting knows better than anyone that if the prince takes this evidence back with him, Wei Mingting will never sleep soundly for the rest of his life. He's bound to take a gamble, setting an ambush at Black Wind Gorge to ambush and kill a prince of the current dynasty. In his past life, Wei Mingting used his secretly maintained Owl Guards regiment to ambush and kill an imperial investigator in Black Wind Gorge without anyone noticing, thereby completely sealing off all irrefutable evidence from Jiangnan. This time, I will use his most prized killing formation to bury him. What an insatiable appetite. Chu Lin-Kei held out 2 fingers, gripped my jaw, and forced me to tilt my head back. The thin calluses on his hands brushed against the skin of my jaw, his gaze both unabashedly scrutinizing and dangerous. "Are you planning to use this prince's life as bait to lure the enemy?" "It's a matter of life and death for both the prince and me." I didn't struggle, letting him grip my wrist as my gaze remained clear and resolute. "If we don't face certain death, how can we find new life through it? As long as your highness's Xuanjia guards can hold off the Shao guards at Black Wind Gorge for half an hour, I have a plan. I'll mobilize every last one of Wei Mingting's private troops in the capital to pin the charges of plotting to assassinate a prince and staging a military coup to force the emperor's abdication firmly on him in the Golden Hall." He suddenly let go and burst out laughing. The laughter was so loud it made the candle flame on the table sway violently. "Pass on the order." Chu Lin-Kei turned and commanded the secret guards outside the cabin door in a deep voice, his tone tinged with the bloodthirsty atmosphere of battle. "Weigh anchor and return to the capital. I'll see for myself whether that old bastard Wei Mingting has sharpened his teeth sharp enough." The night in Black Wind Gorge was as dark as thick ink that would never dissolve. When the first cold arrow, glinting with a blue, poisonous glow, struck the ship's mast with a thud, my hand holding the teacup remained as steady as a rock, without so much as a single drop spilling. "Here it comes," I whispered. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a dense cluster of torches suddenly flared up on the steep cliffs on both banks. The whistling sound of arrows tore through the night wind like a sudden downpour, and countless flaming arrows, doused in flammable oil, rained down upon our boat. At some point, a thick iron chain had been stretched across the river. A dozen or so nimble rowboats, like water spirits in the dark of night, crept silently closer. "Protect the prince!" came the deafening roar of the commander of the black armor guards from outside the cabin, followed immediately by the shrill clang of clashing blades and the muffled groans of flesh being torn apart. Chu Lin-Kei hadn't even taken off his dark blue cloak. He hadn't even drawn the long sword at his waist, but was simply idly fiddling with the inkjade ring on his thumb. That old dog Wei Mingting, he's even bolder than this prince had imagined. He turned his head, his piercing gaze sweeping through the window lattice, reddened by the firelight, to rest on the deck outside, which resembled a battlefield of demons. 500 owl guards have been mobilized in full force. "Nie Zhiwei, what kind of potion did you feed him?" I stood up, walked over to him, and looked out the window at the blood splattering everywhere, my eyes filled with indifference. "I simply used Lu Xuan's private seal to send Wei Mingting a confidential letter via an 800 Li express delivery," I explained calmly. "The letter states that on this trip to the Yangtze Delta, the prince is carrying with him the emperor's secret edict to mobilize troops. Now that Lu Xuan is dead, the prince is leading the 100,000-strong naval force of the Jiangnan garrison upstream along the Yangtze River, preparing to return to the capital to purge the court of corrupt officials." Chu Lin-Kei suddenly stopped fiddling with his ring. He turned his head and looked at me with an expression bordering on disbelief. 100,000-strong naval force? How dare you falsely claim to be acting on imperial orders and make things up out of thin air? As long as he believes it, the truth doesn't matter. I met his piercing gaze, my words as sharp as steel. Wei Mingting has a guilty conscience. The loss of the ledgers has already made him as skittish as a startled bird. Once he hears that 100,000-strong army is closing in on the capital, his only chance of survival is to strike first, before the prince arrives in the capital, seize control of the palace, and use the emperor to command the feudal lords. This is the series of deadly traps I have set. The ambush at Blackwind Gorge was merely a ruse by Wei Mingting to stall the 100,000-strong naval force. His true masterstroke must be taking place tonight in the capital, where he will mobilize his prized 30,000 private troops to force the emperor to abdicate and seize the throne. In fact, on the very day we left Yangzhou, Chu Ling's personal bodyguard had already set out along a back road, traveling day and night to return to the capital with a handwritten memorial from Chu Lin-Kei. He presented the analysis of Wei Mingting's impending treason, along with the half-tiger token capable of mobilizing the West Mountain garrison on the outskirts of the capital, directly to the emperor's desk. The emperor might tolerate Wei Mingting's corruption, but he would never tolerate him laying a hand on the imperial throne. Boom! A deafening roar snapped me out of my thoughts. At the far end of the river, a blaze suddenly flared up, 100 times more blinding than the light reflecting off the cliff face. Those weren't the lights of ordinary riverboats, but the 9-masted warships of the Divine Mechanics Corps, the most elite unit of the Great Abyss Dynasty's Imperial Navy. At the bow of the warship, the bright yellow dragon banner, symbolizing the Emperor's personal guard, fluttered in the night breeze. "By the Emperor's sword, slay the rebel." The deep, resonant voice, imbued with powerful inner energy, echoed through Blackwind Gorge as the military order rang out. The owl guards, who had been so arrogant on the cliff face, were thrown into disarray in an instant. They never could have imagined that instead of good news from their master, what awaited them was a tight net of imperial guards. Chu Lin-Kei finally smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, betraying the cruelty of one who looks down on the masses from on high. He abruptly drew the long sword from his waist, pointing the blade directly toward the outside of the cabin. "Xuanjia guards, heed my command, leave not a single one alive." The slaughter ended unilaterally within half an hour. Just as the river water had turned dark red with mangled corpses and blood, a faint hint of dawn finally began to appear on the horizon. 1 month later, in the capital, the autumn rain fell steadily. On the execution platform at Kaishiku in the West Market, the executioner's cinnabar order slip was thrown down with a thud. Holding a 24-ribbed purple bamboo oil paper umbrella, I stood quietly at the very front of the crowd. In my past life, on a cold, rainy autumn day just like this one, I had knelt here in a flimsy prison uniform, watching helplessly as my father and all 134 members of the Nie family were beheaded. That scalding blood still seems to burn against my skin. And in this life, kneeling in the mud are Wei Mingting, his hair disheveled and tortured beyond recognition, and the 9 clans of the Wei faction behind him. Slash! The executioner's ghost-headed sword came down, and blood gushed out, mixing with the rainwater and seeping into the cracks in the blue stone slabs. I didn't close my eyes or look away until the murky energy that had been pent up in my chest for 2 lifetimes vanished completely along with Wei Mingting's rolling head. The smell of blood is so strong, it's a wonder you were able to stand out there for so long. The drizzle falling on my head was suddenly blocked. Chu Lin Kei had come to stand beside me without my noticing. Today he was wearing a crimson princely robe adorned with python patterns. Against the gloomy, rainy sky, it shone so brightly that I dared not look directly at it. He tilted the umbrella slightly toward me, and the wide sleeves of his robe shielded me from the prying glances of those around us. I turned my head and looked at his chiseled profile, and memories from my past and present lives flashed through my mind like a slideshow. From the moment I was reborn, I had proceeded with caution at every step, forcing myself to become an emotionless monster of vengeance, and it wasn't until this very moment that I finally felt a glimmer of the warmth that belongs to a living person. Now that my great grudge has been avenged, if I didn't see it with my own eyes, wouldn't I be letting down the prince for accompanying me on this journey? I smiled faintly, my eyes reflecting a clarity and sense of release I had never felt before. Chu Lin Kei looked down at me intently. His deep, dark eyes were filled with emotions I couldn't decipher, or perhaps didn't dare to probe further. After a long moment, he suddenly reached out and took my hand, which was gripping the umbrella handle. The palm of his hand was warm and rough, with a strength I couldn't resist. Wei Mingting's game is over, but this prince's game has only just begun. He leaned in slightly and whispered in my ear, in a voice only the 2 of us could hear, Nie Zhiwei, now that you've boarded this prince's ship, don't even think about getting off for the rest of your life. Are you willing to join me in playing out another round on the vast lands of the Dayuan dynasty? The sound of the pattering rain washes away all the filth of this world, leaving it completely clean. I clasped his hand in a reverse grip, met his intensely intense gaze, and the smile at the corners of my lips gradually widened, like a red plum blossom breaking through the ice in spring. Your humble servant dares not disobey. That's the end of the story. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment. Thank you.